Before we go further with Figma fundamentals, let's talk about the most popular frame sizes. Now you know the difference between frames and groups. Let's define what frames you will need in your life most of the time. Well, let's start with mobile apps. If you're designing mobile apps, most likely you're designing them for iOS or Android phones. And in this case, my recommendation is for you at least, again, this is everything that you learn from here, from this course, is from my experience. Absolutely everything. And from my experience, my recommendation is for phone sizes, for iOS, to use here iPhone 13 mini at this time, but don't try to remember the exact phone. Try to memorize the frame size. And the frame size is 375 by 812. It's still the most popular size because there are lots of people who are still using iPhone 10 to up to iPhone 13 Pro. And while in iPhone 13 Pro the size is already different, it's always much easier to scale up the size rather than to scale it down. So that's why I start with something that is smaller. Back in the past, like about 2 years ago, when I designed iOS applications, I always started with the size 320 by the height can be absolutely different depending on the how much content you want to put there. But I started with 320. Why so? Because it was the smaller size, and it meant that if I cover the smaller size, I can scale it up to absolutely any size, and I can use it whenever I want. So it was much easier for me then to work with those sizes. Today, for iOS applications, my recommendation is to use 375 by 812 size. If you're designing Android apps, then in this case, my recommendation is to use the size like here. In Figma, you have Android small and Android large. Honestly, there is no difference here because the most important parameter in mobile applications is width. And width is the same, 360. The only difference is height. And height can be, again, it depends on what is the biggest audience you are designing this mobile application for. If the biggest audience of your mobile application is Android users that are using new phones, then go with 360 by 800. It's much easier to design something that is scrollable, so your height can be different. But width is 360 for Android devices. So remember, 375 by 812 for iOS, 360 by 800 for Android. The next frame we'll be talking about is tablet. And honestly, usually what I realize from my experience that not so many people are using tablets, but sometimes maybe it's also part of your job to design websites for tablets, or let's imagine specifically for tablets applications. In this case, my recommendation is to go with the size. When you go here to tablet, you see absolutely different options. But honestly, my recommendation is to go with iPhone, iPad Pro, or what is more popular, I'm removing it, is to go to archive and to find here in the archive the size 768 by 1024. This is the most popular, and usually this is exactly what people are using to create the breakpoint when you're going from for example, when you're building a responsive website, when you're going from the desktop version, then you go to the tablet version, and then you go to the phone. This is the size that is usually used for the breakpoints. So that's why my recommendation for you for tablets to use this exact size. Of course, you can go and switch to portrait or landscape mode if you want to. So in this case, you can design something for like wider version, or it depending on how people are using the tablet in their case. So it's part of user experience, you understand, right? So in this case, this is the size I recommend you to use for tablets. The next one is desktop. When we go and talk about desktop, when you go to desktop, you have lots of different options here. But the most popular, and my recommendation, is to use 1440, because this is the most popular width for the websites. You can go with any height because, again, you can scroll the website. You can also scroll horizontally, but this is not the usual, not the common user experience. So that's why we are thinking, first of all, about the width. And this is the first width when it comes to desktop. And the second type of frames to use is actually, you don't see them here, but you can find them in the presentation, 1920 by 1080. This is the full size, full screen size. So when you're designing, for example, websites and you're a big fan of Apple, then in this case, 1440 will be more popular for you. But if you're designing usually for PC, for Windows, then this format will be the most popular. My recommendation, again, to go with 1440 because it's much easier to scale up to 1920 rather than to scale down if you designed absolutely everything for this full HD size. Then it can be hard to get to 1440. While you keep responsiveness in mind, it will be much easier for you to start with 1440 and scale up to this size rather than to scale down from 1920 to this size. So that's just my recommendation. And if you're designing, for example, TV apps, this is also the size that I recommend you to go with. It's also really amazing size because of one important reason. If we change the size, but divide the size, the width and height by 3, here in Figma you can do that, you can divide it. In this case, and let's keep proportions, you know where proportions are now. Now it's 360 by 640, which is the size of the small Android screen, boom, of this one. So basically you can design a mobile application for phone. Let's imagine that you are designing something like similar to Netflix mobile application. You can design for this size, and then you just scale it up, multiply by 3, and now you have full HD. This is what people will see on the desktop, of course, on the TV. But of course, you will need to make some adjustments in terms of typography and also the number of elements. I know that usually, yeah, I worked a lot. I have 15 years of experience in design. In this case, I designed, honestly, everything you can imagine. I designed infotainment systems. I designed the applications for cars, TV applications, VUI systems, mobile applications for Android, iOS, for tablets as well, like specifically for tablets, not just something that you scale up or down from desktop or from mobile apps, but specifically for tablets where people can use the tablet application when they're doing interviews. So I can tell you, don't overwhelm yourself and stick to these 5 sizes. They will cover, I would tell you, like 99% of the project you will be designing for. This is when you're designing iOS applications. This one when you're designing Android applications. This one when you're designing the breakpoints for the tablets or tablet-specific tablet applications. Desktop version, this is when you're designing websites, and this size 1920 by 1080, this is when you're designing YouTube thumbnails, presentations, desktop versions of the websites for PC, TV applications. I already told about presentations, but basically any kind of presentation, whether you're designing them for Google Slides, Keynote, Microsoft PowerPoint. So everything, like all the sizes will be this full HD. And that's exactly usually the size that is used for YouTube videos as well. So that's why it's so popular. So define what you're designing it for, choose the frame, and start designing for that frame. Just these 5 sizes will cover 99% of your projects you will be working on. Of course, I'm not talking about something like specific things when you're designing, for example, graphic design for a particular, I don't know, for a particular social media that has a specific size, like Instagram post. This size you can use when you are designing stories or full HD format, but for posts usually you will be using 1350. This will be the size, 4x5. Yeah, in 99 of the cases you will use these frames. And also one more thing, two more frame sizes that I want to cover here is sometimes you're designing for print, and in this case my recommendation is to go, when you go to paper here, usually the most popular are A4 format for Europe, and for US usually people are using, and in Canada as well, is letter size. Yeah, the difference between them is letter size is wider but shorter. So this will be the difference between these two things. So for print, usually people are using these formats. And in rare cases, when you're designing, let's imagine business card or magazine covers, my recommendation is to choose the size specifically and create it yourself, and set the size here in the top right corner for width and height, the size of the inches or centimeters that you're using. For example, when you're designing something like 50 by 70 centimeters, my recommendation is to use something like 500 by 700 pixels. Yeah, in this case, not pixels, points. And if everything that you'll be using will be vector graphic, that will be more than enough for you to use. If you are using raster, if you will be using images, photos, or anything that are not in SVG format, PDF format, text format, or shapes, if you are using actual images, raster images or photos, my recommendation is to multiply it one more time and to use, for example, for the size 50 centimeters by 70 centimeters, is to use the size 5,000 points by 7,000 points. In this case, when you will print it, at least you will have a good quality. So for print, you're using the format that you need for your print work. For desktop and mobile and tablets, you're using these sizes. And I'll see you in the next video.